make the most of it and the best of it. I see my guests already sitting here, and the panelists are dying to get underway because they want to make an impact too. So here to talk about sustainable finance, we have Mario Bombacino from BNP Paribas, Alessandra Del Boca from the University of Brescia, a member of the Centesimus Annus Pro Pontificis Foundation, Amel Karboul from the Education Outcomes Fund and Secretary General, the MEF, operating in 21 countries, created by Ronald Cohen, that was speaking this morning. So this is a fund for education. We'll be talking about with him in a minute. Massimo Tellini, head of circular economy at Intesa Sanpaolo, and Nino Tronchetti Provera, managing partner and founder of Ambienta. Before getting right into our discussion on sustainable finance, let's listen to a contribution from Mario Nava in Brussels. Mario Nava was with us last year at the first edition of our Sustainable Economy Forum. He was at the time candidate for the chair of CONSOB, and he went back to Brussels, and the government thought that a former minister would be an appropriate independent representative of our country. So he's back in Brussels. He's giving us a hand too. He's in charge of the Directorate General in charge of financing across the board, including impact financing. So let's listen to this short video and then we'll begin our panel discussion. Afternoon, everyone.
And with you in San Patrignano, although only by video. Unfortunately, as I said to the President Moratti, whom I thank for the invitation, and all the others, this coincides, your event coincides with the ECOFIN, the informal ECOFIN in Bucharest, and therefore I cannot be there with you. But the good news is that in video we can be there in more than one, and I've brought with me la crème of the sustainable finance team that you see by me. In Brussels, they do not need an introduction. In San Patrignano, we do a very, very quick introduction. Ladies first. Who are you?
I am Caroline Volemans. I'm the deputy head of UNIT, the unit responsible for sustainable finance.
Very good. And who are you?
Good morning. I'm Martin Koch. I'm working in the unit for 4 years now on sustainable finance, and I have a banking background.
Excellent. And now let's get to work. The objective of this short video is to explain you very quickly 3 things, or 4. Why sustainable finance matter, what do we do, how we do it, and when we will do it. So we start with the why. Ladies first again. Caroline, why?
Excellent question, Mario. Yeah, why sustainable finance is important? Well, as you may know, the EU is very committed to deliver on the Paris Agreement objective and on the Sustainable Development Goals. But to succeed, more capital is needed for green and sustainable projects. It has been estimated that between 180 billion to 270 billion are needed every year as additional investment. So to close this gap, clearly public funds will not be enough, and the financial sector has a key role to play in reorienting capital towards more sustainable projects. This is why sustainable finance is so important to deliver on our sustainability agenda.
Very clear. 250 billion a year, soon, to do what, Martin?
To do what? First of all, to increase investments, but also to raise finance for these investments. We do this through various actions. We address the capital markets. We address it through legal frameworks, through best practices, but also through other means to mobilize finance, but also to make the risks which are in the financial system clear and transparent. So there's a mix of legal actions, best practices, and market participants which also have their own ideas, and we try to put it into a right format, and that's how we work.
Thank you very much. How do we do it? I mean, at the Commission, as you know, our strongest weapon is legislation. So we have 3 legislations on the way. 2 have been already politically agreed, thanks to the effort of the 2 persons you see here and all their colleagues, and they have been agreed both in Council and Parliament, so they will soon become law. And 1, which is about the classification of the investments who are good for the transition to a low-carbon economy, as my colleagues have explained. The other one is being voted by the Parliament in these days. and will probably be discussed by the Council later on, and we do hope it will be done by the end of the year. So that's the how. The how is through legislation. However, it's not only through legislation, but it's also through advocacy. Events like yours help a lot because allow us to say what we think, to gather consensus. Last week in Brussels, we have had a conference that I'm sure many of you have seen or have participated, where we tried to move the issue of sustainable finance at the global level. So not only Europe, but also at the global level. Let me give you three numbers. Europe is 7% of the population, produces 21% of the GDP of the world, so 7% of world population, 21% of GDP of the world, and produces 11% of the world emissions. Even if we bring the 11% to zero, there is still the remaining 90% that we need to take care. That's why going global matters. When can we see the last results?
Well, it depends. Immediate results are already visible now. We have some actions which are being implemented and they're on track. Our action plan, which we have launched last year, has a 2 to 3 year time horizon. But of course, it's a long-term action because it doesn't stop. It's only the beginning of a long journey. So I think we will see actions also in the 2020s until 2030 and even beyond. We have a 2050 strategy. So I think it's a long journey which we have just started.
Thank you very much, and I wish you a fantastic conference, a fantastic 2 days in a beautiful place like San Patrignano. Many thanks again to President Moratti, to all the other friends who are there, and I hope you will invite us next year. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
So that was Mario Nava and his colleagues at the Directorate General on Stability on the Financial Capital Markets. And sustainable finance has really come up with a whole new language on what is sustainable, what's not, etc., etc., rather than bandying about the terms nilly-willy. And of course, there's the MiFID regulation coming in. If you propose a customer an investment, you also have to talk to them, to clients and investors, about sustainability. And we're starting to see fund managers advertising and saying that I'm your partner, I'm also against climate change, etc., etc. Some people have been doing this for a long, long time. Nino Tronchetti Provera from Ambienta, the managing director, which has $1 billion in assets under management, or even more, I think. And this is where they started out, by thinking about sustainability and the environment and focusing on investments, specifically in these areas. So you've just closed a third fund, I believe. Has there been demand from investors and funds, etc., etc.? Are people interested in all of this? Well, first of all, we deal with the easy side of sustainability because, you have to divide sustainability between social and environmental sustainability, right? And this is an absolute miracle because on the social side, bringing together economic returns and social returns is much harder than doing that on the environmental side, which is what we do in actual fact. So I think on the environmental side, maybe unconsciously, it's something that we see before our very eyes every day, natural colorings, organic food, filters, sustainable packaging, etc., etc. That's the direction the world is moving in. So if you invest in companies that respect their competitors and maybe save natural resources somehow and produce less pollution in any business, whether you're talking about water-based paints, cooling towers, whatever industry you're talking about. I mean, for example, we have nothing to do with renewable energy. We do not want to get into that area because we invest in pension fund. I mean, we're very specific about what we invest in and what we don't. So you need to offer equal or better returns than everywhere else. We're in the private equity world, and we're amongst the highest returning private equity firms. So this is a concept that came about because it was understood that it was a real business trend. Underlying it is something that was mentioned this morning, and Ronnie Cohen stated it very clearly. It's an economic model that really needs to be sustainable because the alternative is disastrous. So I think I can say that we were fortunate because on the environmental side, so many mistakes were made because their models were, electric cars, renewables, etc., and they've all hit a brick wall in many respects. Whereas we in Milan, I know there's very little private equity in this country, but we've got people coming in from China, Korea, Japan, Canada, the US, and we're unfortunately growing as fast as we possibly can, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and it takes time. We've got $1.2 billion of assets that we're managing. We could quite easily have had 10 times more than that had we been able to invest as we wanted to. But we invest in industry. You have to find the right company. You've got to buy it at the right price. You've got to grow it. It takes time. You've got new markets, new products, etc., etc. It's not something that you can, just conjure up overnight. So you've got teams that have to deal with that. Internal growth is okay, but what about external growth? Is there enough to invest in this? In Italy, for example, for the countries that are going the environmental path? Well, we invented environmental sustainability, not because, we saw the light, but it happened because God gave Europe and Italy so many things in terms of natural resources and such that we've always used them more efficiently, very efficiently. We've looked for, most efficient engines and inverters, etc., etc. Oftentimes you find them in Europe and in Italy. And Europe occupies 54% less energy and equal everything else than the United States. Italy is amongst the most efficient, and in terms of pollution, our population density is such that we used to have factories in the very middle of cities. We had refineries down the road in central Milan. So various laws were brought in. The chemicals industry cut their polluting outputs, etc. And if you grew up in Milan, you'll know that the air was filthy. I mean, there was really dreadful, wretched smog. That's not the case anymore. And now Europe is perhaps the most sustainable continent worldwide. But it's a problem we've had for the last century. We've been training for this job for 100 years. This is something that I often say. But now it's a problem shared by the rest of the world. So there are many Italian companies there are many of them, but we have the same problems as many others, which is when you go offshore, you've got management problems, etc., etc. So what are you thinking about in terms of your upcoming investments? Well, we're working in aluminium, for example, and I actually did my dissertation on aluminium back in 1991, and aluminium really has been growing. It's thriving. It weighs half as much as iron and steel, so it's lighter. It's more insulating, and it requires less energy. So aluminium can be recycled very effectively, and plastics are a whole other ballgame that I don't need to tell you about. So yes, the auto industry is struggling right now. I see there are many companies making auto components, and they see that there is a lot of aluminium being used because there's a demand also from Europe for lighter weight components, etc. Right, so let's go to BNP Paribas. Mauro Bombacino, good afternoon. I make air-to-air missiles, and I come to you and say we want money. Can you invest? What would you say? Well, this is one of those sectors that's very closely monitored. We have a specific policy on defence that's much more restrictive than governments. So, and obviously we limit ourselves to the OECD government, so we're very cautious. We tread very carefully. We've made decisions, drastic and painful decisions, economically speaking, on leaving certain sectors. We got out of coal for energy purposes. We're right out of it. Gas, shale oil, etc. And more recently, we've got right out of tobacco too. So purely for the bottom line. And it's very consistent with our sustainability policy, in fact. So we want to become a world champion in that respect. Well, recently I saw that the Norwegian Sovereign Fund is one of the biggest sovereign funds worldwide, and it announced that it was divesting out of oil. They said, I mean, Norway is one of the biggest oil producers worldwide, but they also said that they were trying to avoid fluctuations in the price of oil, and the environmentalists are saying, great, at last they're going green. So I think that the number of sectors that are invested in is getting narrower and narrower. Well, financial institutions, banks in particular, we are really deeply analysing the environmental and social behaviours of our companies. We have screening processes in place for behaviours, environmental, social, for all of our main clients. So quite above and beyond the credit screening we do, we look at the environmental impacts and social impacts of what our investee companies do. There are many sectors that are under close observation, and we reward other sectors that are behaving virtuously. So we're removing resources from the ones that are not virtuous and taking that money and putting it into the more virtuous industries. So in the short term, you're reducing your returns a little bit, right? Yes, but we've seen what you're cutting. But what about areas that you're seeing demand growing in because of the positive impact on growth, society, integration, and employment? Well, as I was saying before, we want to remove some resources from the non-sustainable and put those into sustainable areas. And we're talking about 168 million euros of our financial statements devoted directly to achieving the 17 SDGs of the United Nations, which is quite extraordinary worldwide. I mean, we're doubling our presence in renewables from 7.5 billion euros to 15 billion for this year. And on the other hand, we're also closely monitoring and keeping a very close eye on something else because, we're speeding up also to keep up with what companies are asking us for. We're looking at speeding up the energy transition, and we're looking into many, many products that we heard about this morning that have measurable impacts in social terms that can, in fact, favour impacts on society. Massimiliano Tellini.
Let's move on to the other credit institutional bank that we have here in this round table, Intesa Sanpaolo. A few days ago, the CEO of the bank wrote a letter to your stakeholders to talk about the broad-ranging initiatives, impact initiatives that you have come up with. And these schemes are translated into something for the local communities, for example, ensuring the opportunities to study for young people. So a series of initiatives, a series of schemes and programs that have seen about 2 billion euros earmarked for the creation of a circular economy. What are these projects really all about? Well, good afternoon, first and foremost. Thank you very much to Confindustria and San Patrignano for having me here today. So, the fund amounts to 250 million euros, and it will grant credit to those tiers which today would not be able to receive credit. I have the privilege of being responsible for circular economy for the Innovation Center of Intesa Sanpaolo, and the 5 billion that you just cited shows that we are really very serious about a theme that will lead to a transformation which from our perspective, will bring us to greater sustainability. Today, we are a bank that is committed on this front. It's something that we've done for many years, and Intesa Sanpaolo has for many years been one of the most sustainable banks on the world, and we have been recognized at international level for our sustainability. For the last 4 years, we have worked together with an international organization for the acceleration of the circular economy, and that is the Ellen MacArthur Association. The idea is to focus on a circular economy, because why, if nature is circular, should an economy not be circular? So we try to actually take a step forward compared to what was already said this morning. Let me explain very quickly. Paradoxically, but just to give you an idea, if we took a plastic cup and after we've used it, we throw it away in the bin for plastic containers, then civically we are performing our civic duty and we are considered sustainable. But we are not solving the problem, because the problem today lies in the components of these products, which means that this product today cannot have a zero impact. On the contrary, it is circular if we redesign the materials used to create that component, that product. So a circular economy, before being about recycling, it's about redesigning. So that means that we need to look at the design process. I can't look at the end cycle of a product at the recycling process or phase. If I want to solve the problem from the beginning, I need to redesign it. And in this redesigning, we are looking at the heart of innovation, which is proposed by the circular economy at international level. And estimates talk about $4 trillion at global level in opportunities. And here, Italy and Europe can play an important role. We can actually play a leading role. So for entrepreneurs, what we are doing is we are putting forth a resource of 5 billion euros in credit, which are destined to financing projects that can transform something. So they are innovative and they can transform, so that we get to the result that I was just describing. We move to sustainability, which is the focus of our attention, but not as the end, rather as the tool, so that our businesses remain competitive and our economy remains resilient. We recently read and saw that there was quite a significant impact on investment. So I wanted to understand if microcredit is still quite strong after the 2017 boom. Now in 2018, we've seen zero growth, and the latest data that we published show that there will be an even bigger fall and drop in 2019 in terms of investments. Well, this is very relevant because circular economy is represented as something that can reignite investments. And we come back to the example I made earlier. It's not just about focusing on the single action of every single stakeholder and player. We need to involve multiple actors. So it's a systemic approach. And often the sustainable world describes this as something that is lacking, that there's no support for this. Another component we heard in 2018 in June, Sir John Elkington, one of the biggest leaders in sustainable finance, and he said, or rather he invented the triple bottom line. He said that we need to focus on this concept because it has failed in a way. Not because it wasn't ambitious enough, but in its implementation, it failed. What has happened is that, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, the environmental concern has been pushed aside to the wayside instead of actually being considered. It didn't impact the way we did business. So today, and this is what the European Commission is telling us, Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Commission, is telling us that the circular economy is the only economic model that makes sense for the European Union. Because, as we said earlier, we import 6 times what we are actually able to export. So this demand for infrastructure, for innovative products, for innovative processes can hopefully reactivate an important economy in Europe, and the investments that we are trying to support go in this direction. The activities need to be oriented in such a way that businesses can, in fact, express their potential for creativity. And we know that in Italy, this is the strength, our driving force. Even international observers have said that this is one of our biggest characteristics. This is one of the driving forces for transition in Italy and in Europe. So now let's move on to Alessandra Del Boca, full professor of political economy from the University of Brescia, but she also is a member of the foundation Centesimus Annus Pro Pontefice. Has something changed since the circular of 2015? For the very first time, in order to protect our heritage, for the very first time in our heritage, we are looking to protect our heritage. There is almost an integral approach to protecting the world surrounding us. Has something changed since then? Or, as the Pope said, behave well and carefully, but nothing actually changes? Or did he actually manage to change the attitude of governments? No, he did actually bring about some change, but he hasn't changed the attitude of governments. No, he has not changed the attitude of governments. Pope Francis has invited, or rather invited Trump to visit, and he showed him a version of his encyclical, of his circular letter, because he wanted to encourage some change. He invited Trump because obviously Trump was seen as his most invincible of enemies. So he started off with him. But I must say, Pope Francis has done an incredible job. He became Pope 5 years ago. And back then, or rather a few years ago, he spoke about the digital era, and now he will be talking about sustainable transformation. And I must say that I'm quite impressed with the way he actually addresses the people. He's very humble, but very strong and very pragmatic. What has the Pope done? The Pope has used his enormous power and visibility at global level. And I realized when I attend these world conferences with 300-400 people, I realized that he has one of the greatest moral authorities at global level. But at the same time, he has an immense international network. And I think this was very important. It has been very important. What has he managed to do? Well, he talks about science. He has been appreciated for the words of scientists that he uses, and he has always offered pragmatic solutions. He wants us to stop destroying our planet. So he takes what we say, he takes what all sustainable missions do at every level, and he uses it. And he focuses on market economy, or looks at it, but he is never superficial. He is against a market that becomes uncivilized. He's not against a sustainable economy. Whereas our enemies against sustainable economy are unfortunately the biggest representatives and advocates. And this also pertains to Italy. So if we take stock of those who have listened to the Pope and those who have not listened, well, then perhaps we can say that the governments are those who have not listened. You study the missions, you study sustainable finance. Do you think that this is something that we can do? Is it feasible, or is it just a marketing tactic? No, I believe, or rather, I'd like to correct something that Letizia said this morning. I think she'll be actually happy with my correction. She said that at the moment, sustainable finance is estimated at $22.3 trillion. But yesterday, the Global Sustainable Alliance gave a new number, a number that is given every 2 years, and it's gone up to 30.7, with a considerable increase, therefore. Europe is at number 14. It has gone a little bit, it has stopped its economic growth. But the good news is that we're at 30.7 trillion, almost 31 trillion, but that means that we still need 5-6 trillion euros until 2030 to actually meet demands. So what is the problem? In my opinion, the problem lies in the strategies that induce investors to include ESG criteria with objective criteria. We're still at the beginning. And by falling into the web of these criteria, we still have too many businesses who are not worthy of it and who are focusing on greenwashing. There are thousands of them, but we still need to see what will happen with the investment strategies of the new Commission. And we are waiting to see what will happen with these fundamental changes. So, well, thank you very much. And now let's end this first round table with Amilcar Boul, who is the Commissioner of UN International Education Commission and Secretary General of the Maghreb Economic Forum. This is a fund that was created by Sir Ronald Cohen, and they finance or fund educational activities with a criterion that we heard about this morning. So the impact is assessed, and you only pay based on the results achieved. So I'd like her to explain to us how this actually works.
Grazie.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Maybe I'll say a few words that are actually in the title of what we do, which is the Education Outcomes Fund for Africa and Middle East. And if you said that you're on the easier end of the spectrum, I think we are the hardest end of the spectrum, because we're not only working on social change, but on social change for the bottom billion. You know, so we have today a big education crisis. I call it a learning crisis, not education crisis, because we not only have 250 million children who are out of school, we have even more, around 350 million children who are in school but not learning. This is obviously not an African and Middle East problem, it's a worldwide problem. I think in Italy as well, you have children who are in school and not learning, or children who leave university and basically to become unemployed. So we all have a result and quality problem. So that's why we want to focus on results, and the best way to focus on results is to incentivize everyone towards results, and that's why we believe the way you pay for things does matters. So we created this fund, which should pool $1 billion in, it's like a battery with 2 electrodes. I won't go into the deep details, but the one electrode of the battery is actually free money. It's aid money, it's philanthropic money that we put on its head, because this doesn't pay for textbooks or salaries, but pay for children that have learned. And why is this important? I give you an example. There is, in Sierra Leone, for example, there was a textbook program that has shown that had absolutely no impact. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent. The textbooks have been sent to the schools, so check, done. But when they checked, they found out that the textbooks were in the cupboards of the school directors' offices, because they had to stay well and clean, and the children didn't get them to learn. So this is what happened when you pay for input. You know, you paid for a textbook delivered to school. That's done. You didn't pay for children learning. So this is the big part. So this billion should pay for children learning from early childhood up to TVET. And this, on the other side, because we pay after the results have been achieved. There are service providers, there can be
how
social
do you measure the results? How do you attach a value to the results in terms of education?
It's a very good question. There are two pieces to that. The first is a conversation with governments to say, what do you care about and how much is this worth for you? How much does it cost? And trust me, this is really a worthwhile conversation because governments also don't think in outcomes. They sometimes just don't know how much it costs. Obviously, we have some historic costs. We work in a design process to define those costs. But then when they're defined, when there is a contract, basically a results-based contract, after the 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, when the results are achieved, we have third-party evaluators who then say this has been achieved. For the time, basically, until the results are delivered, you have NGOs, social enterprises that are working with the children and youth, and they normally cannot wait 5 or 6 years to get paid. And this is where impact investors come in. So this is where impact investors give the working capital to these organizations and help them with performance management. It's like a private equity deal in a way, but for a non-profit. And then when the results are achieved, the investors get their money back from me, from our pooled fund, which is also government money, plus a certain return that is contingent on the outcomes. This, as Sir Ronnie said this morning, exists around 150 times in the world from kids' prison to education, girls' education, to poverty alleviation, and it has shown it is really, we underestimate how much of a big game changer this is. It changes everything completely. Everyone works towards the results, and you reduce immense waste in terms of money. Yeah.
Grazie. Allora,
Thank you. Let's conclude here.